Why did the ancients build bunkers instead of tombs? Throughout your entire life, from your first history lesson in primary school to your academic lectures, you have been fed lies. This lie is so common, so deeply rooted in our culture and consciousness, that we have stopped noticing it at all. It has become the background against which we paint a picture of our past. You have been told that ancient humans, our ancestors from the so-called Bronze Age, they were simple farmers and warriors who had primitive technology. You were told that using soft copper floors, wooden logs and flax ropes, they built buildings that today would pose a challenge to the most modern design offices equipped with supercomputers. Straight-faced historians call these monumental structures tombs, point to the gigantic megalithic structures and say, this is the resting place of the ruler. But have you ever considered the absurdity of this statement? Is it the engineering impossibility of these claims? Does it sting your eyes? How on earth can you cut 400 meters of solid, hard limestone using a copper scraper that dulls after a few blows? Where are these legendary treasures written about in textbooks? Where are the bodies of the rulers for whom thousands of slaves allegedly moved 100-ton boulders over mountains and valleys? Why do the dead need airtight doors that can only be locked from the inside? Why do the dead need complex, engineered perfect ventilation systems? And why the tool marks left on the walls of these chambers scream of mechanical processing technologies, high speeds, and diamond discs that officially had no right to exist in the Bronze Age? Before we go any further, let's get one thing straight. Today we will not listen to legends. Today we will look at function, not faith. The main question we will ask today sounds terrifying. What catastrophe was civilization preparing for, which at a frantic pace but with surgical precision, she built it thousands of such shelters all over the planet? What were they so afraid of that they decided to hide under thousands of tons of stone? Open any archaeology or ancient history textbook. Find a chapter on the Mycenaean civilization with Scythian burial mounds in Crimea or Thracian buildings in Bulgaria. You will see beautiful, colorful photos there. You will read touching, almost romantic stories about powerful kings who wanted immortality, so they ordered them to be buried in giant stone mounds. You will read about the gold, jewels, votive gifts and ritual objects that were to accompany them in the afterlife. It all fits into a logical, a coherent whole. Everything seems to make sense until you ask one brutally simple question that brings down this house of cards. Where are these treasures? Where are these bodies? Where is anything that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that these structures were built as burial places? The truth is shocking. Nothing there isn't. We are talking about thousands of kurgans scattered over a gigantic area from the islands of Greece, through the steppes of Ukraine and Crimea, the mountains of Bulgaria, up to the Caucasus and further east. We see the same construction everywhere, the same identical block connection technology, the same engineering layout and the same disappointing result inside. Archaeologists have been excavating these sites for over 200 years. Hundreds of university expeditions were sent there. Thousands of reports have been written. Hundreds of doctorates have been defended. Millions of dollars, rubles, pounds, and euros were spent. And what do they find? They find perfectly machined chambers with absolutely zero contents. There is emptiness, no gold, no bones, often not even the smallest piece of broken clay vessel that could suggest that a funeral ceremony ever took place there. Official science has a ready excuse for this, which he repeats like a mantra. The tombs were robbed in ancient times. They claim that the bandits got there first and took everything clean. And they disappeared. But that's an excuse, not scientific explanation. This is an attempt to patch up a flawed theory, because if we look at these buildings without prejudice, without the baggage of school knowledge, we will notice something disturbing. They don't look like tombs at all, they look like something completely different. They resemble Structures whose purpose is to survive. Something that requires incredibly thick walls capable of withstanding the impact of the shock wave. Something that requires airtight entrances to shut off the flow of poisonous air or water. Something that requires life support systems. These are bunkers. Now let's get to the hard numbers, the math of impossibilities, and one of the most famous tombs in. Take your calculator. Let's put aside poetry and legends for a moment and deal with hard mathematics and physics. Let's look at the treasury of Atreus in Mycenae. It is the crown jewel of official archaeology. There is an entrance corridor called the Dromos, 36 meters long. The entire corridor is lined with carefully processed, gigantic stone blocks. The width of the corridor is 6 meters. The height of the retaining walls increases gradually from 0 at the entrance to almost 6 meters at the facade. Each of these blocks weighs from 500 kilograms to several tons. They are fitted together so tightly, without the use of any mortar, that you can't squeeze a razor blade, let alone a knife blade, between the joints. But this is only a prelude. The real madness begins next. We enter Rotunda. It is a dome chamber. The diameter at the base is 14 meters and 60 centimeters. The height of the dome is 13 meters and 20 centimeters. This structure was created on the principle of the so-called false vault, i.e. a cantilever vault. We have 33 rings of stone blocks here. Each subsequent ring is slightly smaller than the previous one and protrudes above it towards the center, creating the shape of a beehive. Now, pay attention. The weight of the upper keystone that closes these structures is 120 tons. 120 tons. For comparison, this is the weight of 2 fully loaded modern Abrams battle tanks or 4 large trucks loaded with sand to the brim. And this weight hangs above your heads at a height of 13 meters. The base of this chamber was carved directly into the solid rock. Before construction could even begin, unimaginable amounts of rock material had to be removed. The depth of the cut into the rock reaches 3 meters in places. The volume of extracted stone just to prepare the construction site is about 400 cubic meters. Now imagine the technological process. How long does it take to carve this volume out of hard limestone using Bronze Age tools? Let us assume an optimistic mining standard for a skilled stonemason of the time working by hand. That's a minimum of 10 years of uninterrupted back-breaking work for a team of 20 people, day after day, from dawn to dusk. And this is just the beginning. It's just a hole in the ground. All this was allegedly built in the 10th century BC. Let's recall what this means according to the official version of history. It's the Bronze Age. Mankind does not know iron. There is no hardened steel, no source diamond. The hardest metal available is bronze or copper. Copper is a soft, malleable metal. A copper tool becomes blunt and bends when struck against hard limestone. It's like trying to carve concrete with there is no wheel with spokes and bearings. Virtually unlimited financing for large-scale earthworks. Someone upstairs was clearly interested in discovering this mound. It was at this point that attempts had been made to reach the central chamber for several years. The barrow is gigantic. Covered with a layer of earth and stones more than thick 7 meters. The diameter of the embankment is 70 meters. The volume of earthworks is overwhelming. A Sikh dug almost blindly, not knowing where the entrance was, as if he were looking for a needle in a haystack. He spent 3 years digging through the earth. In February 1837, he finally succeeded. He discovered the entrance and reached the central chamber. What did he see? Did he see golden masks, sapphires and rubies? He saw perfectly worked limestone walls with no embellishments, one scratch, no cracks. He saw a corridor 36 meters long. That number again. The height of the walls increases from 2.5 meters at the beginning to he saw a chamber covered with a stepped conical vault, 9 meters high. Each block weighs between a ton and 2. They fit so closely that the wall looks like a uniform sheet. The joints are practically invisible to the eye, but what is most important is what is inside. Or rather, what isn't there. The bottom of the room and the floor were covered with a thin layer of centuries-old dust. Beneath this dust is pure, untouched rock. No recesses in the floor for the sarcophagus, no rise, no traces of soot on the ceiling that would have been left if the builders had used torches. The walls are smooth, polished. Not a single inscription, not a single religious symbol, not the slightest hint of a funeral ritual. Ashik was amazed, not by the lack of treasures. There are thieves everywhere. He was amazed by the architecture itself. He wrote in his report to St. Petersburg that this structure was comparable in engineering skill to the Egyptian pyramids and superior to anything he had seen in European architecture of the time. The accuracy of the block matching was inhumane. Moreover, the acoustics of the chamber created a strange, unnatural effect. The whisper uttered at the entrance was clearly audible in the farthest corner of the room, but the loud shout from the center of the chamber was immediately muffled, swallowed by the walls. Later, during closer examination, another shocking technical detail was discovered. Between the blocks of walls, in the joints, there are compressed layers of seaweed and sea grass. What for? The official version may be waterproofing, but the mound is on a hill. On dry ground, groundwater is dozens of meters lower. Depreciation during earthquakes is a very advanced engineering concept known today in seismic construction. Or maybe it's the remains of some unknown building material or sealant that has decomposed organically over the centuries. And this is where it starts to get interesting, really weird. Archaeologists find thousands of such objects around: burial mounds in Crimea, tombs in Bulgaria, then losses in Greece. The same image everywhere. Huge amounts of work, complicated, identical technology, perfect precision, and the same result everywhere. Empty chambers. Now many skeptics will write in the comments, it's simple. The robbers were 1,000 years ahead of the archaeologists. Okay, that's a logical argument, so answer me one question. Where are the signs of break-in? These structures are closed with multi-ton stone blocks. Entrances are often specially covered with earth and camouflaged. To get inside, serious efforts are needed. Heavy equipment, levers, time. Robbers are not ghosts. They had to leave traces of their activities. Breaches in the walls, traces of crowbars, damage to blocks when moving them, abandoned tools, remains of broken items of less value. But archaeologists time and time again find chambers in perfect, intact condition. They look like they were there on purpose, emptied, cleaned clean and sealed. Let's look at the structure itself again, this time from the perspective of an engineer, not an art historian. The corridor leads to the chamber at a specific angle. The walls gradually narrow upwards and towards the entrance, creating the intended optical effect. When you stand inside the chamber and look at the exit, the corridor appears twice as long as it actually is. This is the so-called forced perspective. This is not a coincidence. These are advanced engineering and optical calculations. Each block in the wall is cut at a unique, precisely calculated angle. The difference in thickness and slope is several millimeters for each row of stones. How can this be done in the darkness of a cave or the semi-darkness of a construction site, using primitive string measure? The research expedition of Andrea Sklyarova, examining the famous Lion Gate in Mycenae and the surrounding walls, made groundbreaking observations. Traces of machine processing, not manual processing, were discovered on hard stone blocks and conglomerates. Non-primitive. These are traces of a circular saw. We see perfectly even cuts, several centimeters deep, which stop as if the machine operator suddenly stopped working. The analysis of traces, the so-called traceology, indicates that the rotational speed of the tool must have been very high and the abrasive grain extremely hard. Otherwise, the stone would not be cut cleanly, but would be crushed and broken off. In the Bronze Age, such technologies did not officially exist. It's like finding a car tire track in a geological layer dating back to the time of the dinosaurs. Someone will say that the ancient masters had a lot of time and used a simple craft with virtuoso skill. Sounds reasonable until you look at the experiments of experimental archaeology. The copper saws of that time were soft. They were used together with quartz sand, which acted as an abrasive. The process was excruciatingly slow, rough, leaving uneven, wavy scratches and a wide lash. And here we see a narrow, even, surgically precise incision, as if the stone was being cut a modern, high-powered diamond angle grinder. And this is where the historical narrative breaks down. You can see that in some places the saw was run over the same groove several times. Operator error, correction, recut. It wasn't a hand job where every scratch was the result of hours of rubbing. It was a mechanism that could be undone, set and restarted in a split second. A tool that does not get tired, does not tremble in the hand and cuts granite like butter. In those days, according to the textbooks, this was how they did it. A copper sheet was taken, bent into a semicircle, and stretched over a wooden bow. 2 men were sawing. One pulled forward, the second backward, the third through wet sand. The process took days to cut the stone to a depth of 10 centimeters. The result was always lopsided with the. Here we have surfaces as smooth as a mirror, flat as a billiard table. The weakest link in any handsaw is human muscle fatigue. Humans cannot maintain equal pressure, angle and speed for much time hours. The hand trembles, the angle changes, the cut comes out crooked. But these cuts in Mycenae are as straight as an arrow along their entire length. This means that they either had completely different technologies that we have forgotten about, or it was done by another civilization whose existence we do not want to acknowledge. Let's compare the technology of building mounds with modern construction standards. Today, to create a self-supporting 15 meters diameter dome structure made of stone, engineers would have to use complex static calculations, CAD computer modeling, and for safety they would use steel reinforcement and concrete. Without this, the risk of collapsing under its own weight is huge. And here the structure is held together solely by the precise alignment of the stones and gravity. It has been standing for millennia. It has survived earthquakes, wars, and erosion. No adhesive mortar, no metal reinforcement, just stone on stone and no gaps. This is a masterpiece of engineering, not the work of primitive tribes. Now let's look at geography this phenomenon, because scale and repeatability are the key. Kerch, corridor 36 meters, chamber with a dome, limestone blocks, nearby barrows, Chesmensky Melek, same length, same structure, same proportions. You can superimpose the architectural plan of one barrow on the plan of another, and they will coincide with an accuracy of centimeters. It's mass production. The golden barrow covered externally with huge stone blocks without mortar. The so-called Cyclopean wall. Blocks weighing 1.5 tons each. On top of a hill 100 meters above sea level. To build such a mountain, 20,000 cubic meters of hundreds of kilometers away. Thracian tomb in the village of Mezek. Dome, identical megalithic blocks. Tomb Aleksandrowski, the same. Greece, the treasury of Atreus, the tomb of Clytus and Mestra, Agamemnon's dome. Everything is made according to one standardized pattern. One technology, one architectural style, the so-called two style, the same limit dimensions. Even the orientation of the entrance to the cardinal directions, often to the east or southeast, is the same. Historians will say it's convergence. Various nations have independently arrived at similar solutions. It's like saying that the US and China independently invented an iPhone with identical appearance and components without knowing about each other. Not only the general ideas and the mound agree, but also specific unique technical details. The angle of inclination of the dome is often 32 degrees, the width of the corridor is standard, the thickness of the walls is from 4 to 6 meters. A unique method of dry joining blocks without mortar. Optical narrowing effect. It's not just hell-like, it's identical. It looks as if someone distributed the same construction design, the same plans, the same ISO standards to all builders in the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, or as if one and the same architect traveled around these lands, supervising the construction of a network of facilities according to a uniform standard. But official history says these Bronze Age regions didn't have it that way. Close political and technological contacts. Yes, there was trade in wine and olive oil, but to transfer advanced engineering technology and standardized defense architecture on such a scale would require a single empire. And the textbooks are silent about such an empire. Things get even more interesting with dating. This is a real comedy of errors. All these buildings officially date back to the 10th century BC for Crimea and Thrace, or the 10th century BC for Greece. Barrow royalty and age. Melek of Czechoslovakia and age. Thracian tombs and age. Mycenae, 10th century BC. Although the technology is the same, which suggests an error in dating about 1,000 years, as if on cue, archaeologists around the world have independently concluded that all of this was created in a narrow window of time or two. But what is this dating based on? Notice this key question, because it is the foundation of fraud. Typically, the age of a building is determined based on items found inside, the so-called archaeological content. Coins, ceramics and jewelry have a style typical of their era. You find a coin from 300 BC. You assume the grave is from that, but what was found in the burial mounds? 0. Emptiness. No primary artifacts. So where did this date come from? It was simply made up, inferred from what archaeologists thought. In the 15th century in Crimea there was a Bosporan kingdom, rich and strong. Only they could build it. So we type, an age is not science, it is guessing, it is matching facts to theories. The actual age of these structures is unknown. They may have stood there for thousands of years before the Greeks and the sites. They may have 5,100 years. The Greeks could only find them, restore them and reuse them, and we attribute authorship to them. Now armed with these doubts, let's look at these objects from a completely different perspective. Reject the word grave. Forget about kings and priests. Look at them through the eyes of a military fortification engineer. What do you see? Some reach 6 meters of solid stone and earth. This is more than in medieval castles. The famous Castle Crag de Chevalier in Syria, an unconquered Crusader stronghold, has walls up to 5 meters thick, and here we have 6 or more meters plus an earthwork. You see a narrow dromos entrance that is strategically easy to defend. They can be blocked with one large block or defended by a handful of people against an army. You see the domed structure, the rotunda, which is the most stable architectural form, capable of withstanding enormous pressure from above, such as a shock wave, earth pile, flood. Modern military engineers confirm that these barrows could withstand a direct hit from a classic artillery shell or an aerial bomb. These are the air raid. Shelters of antiquity. Next, the ventilation ducts. Small, cleverly hidden openings in the ceiling and walls that provide air circulation but are not visible from outside and are difficult to clog. Why ventilation for a dead body? Living people crammed into a shelter. Yes, strange acoustics. Amplifying whispers and suppressing screams is an ideal solution in a command bunker or collective shelter where you need to hear commands, but avoid noise chaos. Drainage systems. In many mounds, complex systems of gutters and drainage under the floor were found. What for? So that the mummy doesn't get wet. Or maybe to provide sewage and domestic water for a group of people. Pay attention to the entrance system. Many mounds have a lock structure. Outer gate, long, narrow corridor, dromos. The inner gate is a classic security lock. It allows you to control who enters, and in the event of an attack or outdoor air contamination, it creates a buffer. Why such complicated safeguards to protect a dead body? A thief will get in anyway if no one is watching. It's like protecting living people who are hiding inside from something terrible what is happening on the surface. And the threat is so serious that it is easier and safer to hide under millions of tons of earth than to fight or run away. If we accept the official version of the tomb for kings, we must believe that the former rulers were crazy paranoids who spent 90% of their country's GDP on building underground halls stronger than nuclear bunkers just to lie there after death. This makes no economic or logical sense. This is not a tomb. This is a protective building, a bunker, a shelter, an ark of survival, a place where the elite or the entire community could hide for a long time while waiting for the end of the cataclysm. If this were one such facility, we could be talking. About the whim of a local warlord, but there are thousands of them. Throughout Europe, the same technology, the same deployment, often near water sources, but on high ground. To avoid flooding. Logic suggests people were afraid. But what? Najd are local. The Mongols attack here. Why build a standardized network of thousands of shelters over a territory of several million square kilometers? This is not the scale of a tribal war, this is the scale of a planetary threat. They were preparing for a global catastrophe, something that could wipe out life from the face of the earth. Fire from heaven, flood, nuclear winter. And judging by the fact that the buildings are empty, someone really used them for their intended purpose. People descended into these halls, closed the stone blocks behind them, they waited and then either left, taking everything with them to rebuild the world, they either died somewhere else or never left and their bodies were disposed of later. But there are almost no traces of everyday life, as if someone had thoroughly sterilely cleaned the rooms before leaving them forever. Base closure protocol. Now look what happened to these objects. In modern times. Because if these were bunkers, someone might have wanted us to never ask the right question. Kerch, Golden Barrow, the year is 1843. General Rosenberg, a high-ranking military officer of the Russian Empire, blow up the top of the mound using explosives and gunpowder. The official version for the press and the Tsar. Treasure hunting. They wanted to get in faster. Think for a moment. The general, a man of discipline, logistics and defense, suddenly wastes valuable military resources. Gunpowder, people, time to destroy an ancient monument. This wasn't simple greed. This looks like deliberate liquidation, destruction of evidence, deleting an object that should not exist. After the explosion, the official story says that local peasants dismantled the facade panels to build houses. It's a very convenient fairy tale, but try to imagine poor farmers without cranes and trucks dismantling cyclopean walls. The blocks weigh 1.5 tons. They fit perfectly. To remove one, you have to move the adjacent ones. How to transport a 1.5-ton boulder by horse-drawn cart? Why does the guy need such a big stone? Building a hut out of megaliths is impossible without heavy equipment. It's easier to take small stones from the field. Yeah, the version about the peasants is a smoke screen. Explains why a unique structure that has survived. In the 19th century it turned into a pile of rubble. The 19th century was a time of mass destruction of megalithic heritage around the world. In Crimea and the Caucasus they are blowing up burial mounds. In France, they destroy dolmens to build roads. In England they dismantle stone circles like Auberry, claiming that the bags are in the way. In Greece, they are rebuilding ancient foundations. The same pattern everywhere. Discover, describe, briefly, destroy or hide, rewrite history. Look at the chronology of events. 18 years. Great enthusiastic excavations begin. Scientists are shocked. They write about the technologies of gods. They compare crime, accidents, explosions, demolitions begin. 19,860s. Most of the most controversial objects are already destroyed, buried, or closed to visitors. 1980s. In new scientific books, burial mounds are already described as primitive, secondary objects undeserving of attention. History has been cleared, memory has been reset, and here we come to the question: who would have an interest in such a reset, and who could theoretically build a network of shelters on a continental scale? So who built it? What power was capable of coordinating such a project on a continental scale? Open your old maps. Maps from the 10th and 10th centuries that have not yet passed the censorship of the 19th century. On many of them, on a huge-scale area of Eurasia, where it is today Russia, Siberia, Central Asia, the name Grande Tartaria appears. The Great Tartaria stretches from the Urals to the Pacific, from the Arctic Ocean to India and China. On these maps, for example those of William Berry from 1680 or Johann Homan from 1716, we see a dense network of cities, roads, and provincial borders. This is not an empty land inhabited by wild nomadic tribes in the wilderness. It is an organized state, an empire, a confederation. Even the Encyclopaedia Britannica in its 1771 edition describes Tartaria as a huge country, and then in the mid-19th century this name disappears from maps, is erased, replaced by the Russian Empire and Mongolia. Now overlay the location of our mysterious barrows and bunkers onto this map. Crimea, part of Little Tartaria, Caucasus, Tartary border, southern Urals, the metallurgical center of Tartary, Ortage, where there are also megalithic burial mounds, eastern Tartaria. All of these tombs are located in a territory that was once united under one flag, often depicted as a dragon or a game on yellow background. Is it a coincidence or maybe proof that these buildings are the defense infrastructure of this particular civilization? The technology of their construction indicates a single source of knowledge. From Greece, which may have been a vassal or an ally, or part of an earlier global culture, to Siberia. The same engineering solutions, polygonal walls, domes, acoustics. It couldn't have been created independently. This required central planning, one technical language, one system of weights and measures, one economy capable of mobilizing millions of tons of stone. Building 1,000 bunkers to one standard, and so Tartaria is impossible without a global state. And the state knew. They had astronomers, they had knowledge, they had technologies that we don't understand. They saw the end coming. They invested everything in the survival project and disaster struck. Perhaps the mudflow, the mat flood that alternative researchers speak of. Sudden liquefaction of the ground, gigantic mud floods that flooded the ground floors of cities around the world. Maybe a war using energy weapons. Civilization collapsed, cities were destroyed or buried. Population decimated. The bunkers were deserted. New people who came to this land or came out of hiding after generations of amnesia found these structures. They didn't understand them. So they created myths. Greeks about Cyclops, Scythians about ancestors, we about tombs. Each nation invented its own fairy tale to explain the presence of gigantic ruins that they were unable to build. But the elites of the 19th century, those who took over the world after the reset, knew more. That's why they destroyed, that's why they falsified dates, that's why they created the myth of primitive antiquity, so that we wouldn't ask questions about our true power in the past. The stones still scream the truth if you are willing to listen. It is impossible to counterfeit saw blade marks mechanic. It is impossible to explain the identity of structures in Bulgaria and Crimea by chance. These kurgans are not tombs, they are nodes of the global civil defense network of Tartaria or else older civilization. We live on the ruins of their world. We walk along their buried roads and believe in fairy tales about rulers in sandals who moved mountains on a whim. And if you think that barrows are everything, you are wrong. Remember the Derinkuyu underground cities in Turkey. A city carved into scale, descending 85 meters into the earth. 18 levels. Ventilation systems, stables, schools, churches, wells, wine presses. Space for 20,000 people and livestock. Officially a refuge from Arab invasions from 7th century. Nonsense. The invasion lasts a week. This city is designed for years of self-sufficient living isolated from the surface. The door to this city is giant stone mill wheels that can only be surrounded from the inside. What were the people who descended into this darkness afraid of? What must have been happening on the surface of the earth? What hell must have been raging? That they preferred to live in the cold, damp, no sun, crowded, whatever, don't go outside. Think about this the next time you see a picturesque kurgan on a trip. This is not a monument to the king's pride, it is a monument to fear and a monument to the will to survive. It's Noah's Ark, made of stone. Subscribe to this channel if you want to know more forbidden stories. Press the bell because the algorithms will try to hide this video. There are still many puzzles ahead of us. Underground tunnels connecting continents, lost energy technologies. We will keep digging, keep asking uncomfortable questions, because the truth is always close. It often lies right under our feet, covered with a layer of mud and lies. You just need to want to see it.